Hi, and welcome to another episode of Let's Get Vaccinated, where each week we deliver a healthy shot of science and facts. We do two things on this show. We answer your questions about vaccines and the pandemic, and we all learn effectively how to communicate science, because sharing science is how we keep all of our communities safe. Now, in case you don't know me, my name is Vicki Chan. I'm a biologist and science communicator based at Columbia University in New York, and I'm the managing director for March for Science. So let's talk about the CDC. So 2 weeks ago, the CDC issued new guidelines saying that fully vaccinated people do not have to wear masks indoors. The new guidelines are controversial, to say the least. There's been a huge backlash from the public health community who are saying that the guidelines are way too premature. And we've gotten a lot of feedback from all of you in our community about feeling unsafe, as not everyone is vaccinated yet. And there's no way to tell who is or isn't in public spaces. So yes, we need to talk about this. And joining us today to help us sort through this muddle are three physician experts from our wonderful partner organizations. Firstly, let's welcome Dr. Neecey Hudson from Hood Medicine. How's it going?
Good. How are you?
I'm great today. Thank you. And please welcome Dr. Krishnan Narasimhan from Doctors for America. Hi, how's it going?
Doing great.
And our third guest today is Dr. Vicki Chan from This Is Our Shot.
Hello.
How's it going?
Good.
So yeah, let's talk about these CDC guidelines now. Like, they were controversial, and there's been a lot of chat about them. And, so each week we ask our community what questions they want answered. And for this one, we received a lot of questions. In fact, around 700 of them about these new masking guidelines, which was a lot. And you know what? Like 95% of the questions or comments to this, you know what they were? They were basically this.
What? Why?
Yeah. Basically, everyone was saying, what? Why? How could the CDC do this? So I think that was a lot of reactions in the medicine world, a lot of reactions in the scientific world and public health world. So I would love to hear from all of you. What was your reaction when you first saw these guidelines come out? Maybe Dr. Neecey Hudson, first you could go.
Sure. You know what? I feel like, on its face, it's accurate for them to say that the vaccines are effective. They are. And so, it's reasonable to assume that if you're vaccinated, your risk is minimized, right? But I think it just forgets the nuance of like the still very much vulnerable Black and brown communities whose populations are like lagging behind in vaccinations. And, it kind of gives people, the rest of the population, sort of further permission to endanger these groups, as we have all along with them on the front lines, making them going out and hawking our wares and not providing for the people who are struggling in society throughout this. They got about $600, right? So that was helpful. Mm-hmm. It's true that like a third of the adult population is a great milestone, but sort of implicit in that to me is the presumption that we'll be able to significantly close that gap with the remaining 2/3. And as things stand, it doesn't seem like we may. There's a lot of holdout groups across all demographics, and the sort of conspiracy hysteria is so rampant, not only in the white conservative sort of stereotypical QAnon communities, but also it's seeping into Black and Brown communities now too. And ultimately, while I trust their science, but I don't trust their judgment. To me, it seems like the move serves the economy best, and it sort of facilitates the government continuing to pass the buck on to states and to the localities and ultimately to individuals instead of promoting leadership, which we put them in office to do. So they could have pushed back and advised caution with respect to the mask, because continuing like that basic preventative measure would allow us to pretty much get back to normal with vaccination, right? Y'all can wait a little bit longer. We're just indulging the toddlers among us. They should have instead advised the government to do something to incentivize it for businesses and individuals, because we may not be able to convince everyone with messaging in time to save off another wave or permit the emergence and spread of new mutant variants. To me, it's troubling, and it makes it hard for people like me, like, not to lose or confuse my audience in making a sound critique against their advice, while like also ensuring people understand the science is still, perfectly reliable. It's just poor judgment, or at least if you had the preservation of like all human life top of mind and not just certain pockets of the population, it's poor judgment to me.
Yeah, thank you for that. I know it's pretty frustrating because we are so close in many ways, right? Just hold your guns a little bit, right?
Yeah.
Dr. Vicki Chan, what was your reaction when you first heard of this?
I mean, I agree with what you and Dr. Neecey has already said. I really can't say it much better than Dr. Neecey did. I mean, the other thing that I want to bring up is our children are not vaccinated yet. I'm a mother, and that's a whole population as well that is still at risk, and as a mother, my kids still, technically my kids are unvaccinated, so they need to mask. And so as a parent, I am going to continue to mask, even though I'm fully vaccinated. So, I mean, I get it. I understand what the CDC is coming from. I do wonder do they forget about the kids? I don't know, like, I honestly, I don't know. And I've been having this conversation with a lot of people. I'm very active on social media. I trust the science. I think a lot of the pushback is, well, don't you trust the science? Yes, I trust the science. I trust the vaccines. I don't necessarily trust the people or the judgment, the honor system, right? We've heard all these words getting thrown around. And so, yeah, optimistically cautious, or cautiously optimistic, I guess. I hope they're
Absolutely
right with this call.
Thank you for that. Dr. Krishnan, what did you think of the guidelines?
Well, Lucky, I think like other people, I was surprised. I think it kind of felt premature. And I'd say this, look, I think with public health messaging, we've got to be truthful, draw on the best evidence. And I think they're technically accurate. I think we've got to be probably very clear in how we say things. And I think we have to prepare people. And I think even if we're following the science, the challenge is we're in the middle, I think, of the greatest behavioral change experiment maybe in human history, right? We've all had to do it. And we all had to learn how to do masking and social distancing. Some people better than others, right? Not everybody was on board with that. But we did that. And I think building those habits was not easy. Pulling back from those habits is going to be hard, especially if, I think the genie will be out of the bottle, because can we relearn that stuff? Will we want to after going through a year like we just did? I think it's going to be hard. So, I'll just say, so for example, I had a patient who's a diabetic today. I'm an academic family physician. I'm at Howard University in Washington, D.C. And I'm trying to get this person ready for insulin. They need to be on insulin, but getting on insulin it's a big thing to take in. So I try 3 to 6 months in advance to say, I'm going to try all these other things. If it doesn't work out, here's where we're headed, because I'm preparing you for a big behavioral change. So I think that's what was missing here, is you can't just drop it. I don't know if it was a Friday afternoon, but it can't be a random drop and then not coordinated, right? So we need consensus building. You need, to the point about states, right? We need all states to be on board. We need public health leaders to be on board. It shouldn't actually be a shock to any of us, right? It should have been communicated to say, and to the public, that, hey, this is a step where we're at. Perhaps is it a vaccination target? Is it something else? We do it in stages, much like we had to do it earlier. That way, we will prepare ourselves for this new behavioral change. So I think that's the part they did not take into account. It's a little bit surprising, and I hope for the best, but I'm concerned that we're all going to go a little crazy a little too quickly.
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you for that. And I agree with everything that you said. And I do think it's a tricky position, right? Because I think there's amazing, brilliant scientists and public health people at the CDC. They do a hard job. It's been a hard year, and I do think, as we say, the science is correct here. But in terms of policy, there's just so much more that needs to go into decision making more than just science, right? It's it's behavioral science, it's stakeholders, it's equity, all of these things. And I think really one of my immediate reactions was that this did not sound like a decision that really centered communities most impacted by the pandemic, because if we were doing that, we would be much more cautious, I feel. So maybe I would love to sort of underscore that point, really. So, maybe if we could talk about what impact in terms of equity on this decision by the CDC, right? And how can we navigate around that? What do we need to sort of uphold equity going forward, given that these guidelines are coming out now? Dr. Vicki, do you want to start with that maybe?
Oh, I am probably not. I think I'm not. I'm going to pass that off to maybe Dr. Neecey or Dr. Krishnan, who, probably have much better words for that.
Sure. Maybe Dr. Neecey?
So I think, it's a very complex problem because it's not just us. It's, like I said, it's across all demographics. There's a critical communication piece that's missing here for a lot of communities, not just ours. But in terms of inequities in access and fairness, I think we're all well aware of, the hesitancy that, Black and Brown and Indigenous communities have because of historical unethical human experimentation and medical bias and apartheid and, sterilization. Even today, just last year, ICE is sterilizing women in detention camps still. So people don't trust the face of this system, which for most people is their physician. So, okay, that line of trust is broken. We restrict educational access to most poor people, and we make education the gateway to privilege in our society. So most people don't have a lay understanding of the science. So they're already sort of left behind in that sense, and no one's messaging directly to them to help them sort of understand. And that just sort of underscores everything that's wrong with our system to begin with. And I feel like we're sort of expecting like the infrastructure that we have now and how it currently operates, which is sort of a vestige of this continual deliberate effort to disenfranchise Black and Brown people, right? So we expect the system now in this crisis to be able to cover all these people that they have historically disregarded. That's unreasonable. We have to do more. And that's where the equity piece is missing to me.
Absolutely. Go, Dr. Krishnan.
But no, I was just going to underscore that. I mean, Dr. Hudson's absolutely right. We heard so much at the beginning of the pandemic about, the disparities are widened. We need to focus. But to your point, if you don't rebuild a new infrastructure, you're going to get the same results. And we've seen that. And again, the people often most affected are Black and Brown communities who continue to be frontline workers, right? Still at highest risk for COVID. You've got the issue around longstanding distrust, which let me tell you, I have about 4 or 5 conversations today, right? All around vaccine and working with people. And so it's an ongoing process, right? It's an ongoing conversation. I know that with my patients, and they've built up a lot of trust over the years with me, and but we're still working, and there are a lot of people who need to get there. So I think, and maybe the CDC has internal data, but they should have made it clear what kind of targets we were looking at, right? Yesterday, we crossed the 40.2% vaccinated in the U.S. Great milestone, right? I mean, what an accomplishment, but that's the average. what does that mean for underserved populations and vulnerable communities? What did those numbers look like? We don't know. What were the targets that say, hey, look, we've made it, right? So I think we got to be a little bit careful on unfurling the mission accomplished banner too early, and really focus on the people and communities who still need the help.
Absolutely. And I love what you said before about in terms of, when they put these guidelines, it felt like there needed to be sort of more community conversations, right? Involve the communities that these decisions or guidelines are impacting before, rather than just dropping it suddenly. That's really the core to all equitable decisions, is making sure you talk to the communities who are most impacted. So I think this is something that's important. And, these guidelines are out there. And I think really now our goal really as citizens and people of the country should be to figure out how we can now that this at the federal level is out there, what can we do to make up for that gap in inequities at the local level? And so that's why it's important that we have conversations like this today, because we need to understand in our community what we can do to keep protecting our communities during this time. So appreciate you joining us today, and appreciate everyone joining at home today. So we also received a lot of questions from the audience, so thank you everyone for doing that. We're going to get into them right now, and for everyone watching, please do leave any other questions that you may have in the comments, and we'll try to answer them as we go along. So you all ready for the questions?
Yep.
Awesome.
Yep.
So I'm going to read them out, and I'll just let anyone jump in, and we'll work it out from there. So our first question is on young kids, and I think Vicki was talking about this, your young child as well. How do we, and I think it's a question that many people are asking right now, how do we protect young kids who aren't eligible for the vaccine if those who are unvaccinated no longer have to wear masks?
Well, I mean, I think, I can talk about what I'm doing with my kids, right? I think
Yeah.
there's no right or wrong. Like, I think people are very sensitive, when you tell them how you should or shouldn't do things, right? So technically children are not vaccinated. So per the CDC guidelines, they should continue precautions. They should continue to be masked. And so that's exactly what we're doing. And so to set that example, I am continuing to be masked. And I am continuing precautions. I know most of the world is kind of back to normal, but, as a parent, I will still be protecting my children. So, we are not going to crowded areas. We are keeping our distance. We are continuing social distancing. We are continuing to mask. I will ask people if they are vaccinated, if they're unmasked around my kids. Actually, my kids have learned this. We had someone come by the house, and my daughter immediately was like, "Is she vaccinated?" I was like, "Ask her." Right? I'm not, and she did. And she was. But, kids are smart. Like, they know. And so, I think, they will continue doing as they are used to doing. We kind of talked about this, like that transition period, they haven't transitioned. To them, it's still the same. And so, I will be continuing the precautions just like before the new guidelines happened.
Absolutely. Go ahead, Dr. Krishnan.
Oh, yeah, I was just going to say that, I think there's a little bit of a thorny issue, right? Because, again, one, vaccine's not available. Two, kind of the base rate among kids is lower. Complications are lower. So, you'll hear a lot of people say, right, but why aren't you following the science here? And so I think the science does show reduced risk for children, but if we're trying to get to herd immunity, it's going to be very hard without including children in that mix, because there is going to be some transmission. I think masking is still definitely a good thing. I think, less outdoors, we know that there's less outdoor transmission is something that we can potentially have some relaxation around, especially around sports. And even some of the school data shows that luckily there hasn't been as much transmission. But I'll tell you personally, right, with my 3 kids, it's, it does still feel like it'd be great to get them vaccinated, right? I don't feel that we will have the freedom that we currently vaccinated adults until that's done for them. It's sort of, where we're at. It's a straightforward issue.
Can I underscore the risk really quickly though? Because even though a lot of kids, I mean, obviously younger kids, their immune systems are super aggressive, they're naive, you know what I mean? Like they are more robust. And so, a lot of them have been able to fight it off. A lot of investigators are looking to kids to see like, how is it that they were able to evade it so well. But my thing is, we haven't really been able to have the time to figure out what those determinative factors are for which kids get really, really sick and unfortunately perish, and which ones just sneeze for a couple of weeks and then they're fine. I have a different risk tolerance level than most parents, I suppose, because I'm not willing to take that risk with the lives of my children. If I don't know what makes the difference, how could you tell, whether your child would get that sick or not? So it's like, be reasonable. Come on. I mean, we're cautious about everything else. And I hope that parents are like really seriously considering vaccinating their children. Right now, children 12 and up can get vaccinated, and they're anticipating kids 2 to 11 being submitted for approval in September, and then toddlers and infants maybe Q1 2022. Those trials are going on now. So we need to start having those conversations with parents, because just like with this, the states and the localities, they're going to push all of our kids right back into school. And we need to be sensible about protecting them. They already have a shot record. There should not be resistance to this. We vaccinate our kids all the time if we have sense. So, yeah.
Thank you for that. And let's do all the kids questions, because as you can expect, we have quite a lot of them. Because, again, many kids aren't able to get the vaccine at the moment, so that's understandable. In terms of, risk tolerance, I guess we get this question a lot, right? Kids, have spent a year cooped up inside and they want to see other kids. That's completely understandable. So, at what levels of community vaccination or case rates is it safe for children to have unmasked indoor play dates? That's a tricky one, right?
Is it tricky though? They're germ boxes. Is it that tricky? They're disgusting. Why? Oh gosh.
Thinking about this question, right? I mean, if anybody could figure out the perfect level of community vaccination and case rate, I'm all ears. Please share with us, because that's a very hard sort of calculation, right? And if you're looking at your city, your state, I mean, that's not you and your family and friends. So I think you could make, and I do this with my patients too, what's that risk benefit for you? Why is this vaccine good for you, for example, personally, as beyond the society piece? And I think you could do it within your circles, and you could say, are people vaccinated? Well, if 2 families are vaccinated and the kids are obviously unvaccinated right now, unless you got 12 and above, and maybe by September, we'll have younger, of course. But those people, per CDC guidelines and per science, I think can get together, feel safely. Again, in smaller groups is probably better than larger. I think where it gets harder is vaccinated and unvaccinated, right? Can you adequately predict the risk? I mean, I'm not sure any of us could easily do that calculation on a napkin or anything like that. We don't know. So that's where I think, masking definitely still has an absolute role, and why the CDC might have been a little premature saying that, go ahead and start your bonfires and burn them, right? That we know does provide protection. And if you're going to be with people who are unvaccinated for, many reasons, that has to be part of your risk calculation. And that's the thing. That's one tool that we have, along with social distancing, that we know helps change that risk.
Yeah, and I want to echo what Dr. Krishnan was saying. I think communication is key. Like you just have to ask, and I always, in the chat group, like, I'm going to be that mom. I'm going to ask it, right? Like, are you vaccinated? Are we wearing masks, right? It's just easier that way, just to have that open communication and just expectations, especially with kids.
And I love what you said about your kid just asking people straight out. Kids are great at doing that. There's no filter sometimes. So take the lead of your kids sometimes on that, right? And I think it's true that in terms of the CDC, like, in a pandemic and in terms of public health measures, no one measure, even as good as amazing as the vaccines are, is perfect, right? And so this is why we have different public health measures, and it's called the Swiss cheese model. People might have seen, because there's holes in each layer of Swiss cheese. So the more different, if you're worried, then the more different layers of public health measures that you take, the more safe you and your community are going to be. So this is why it's important that we don't stigmatize wearing masks, and we keep encouraging them when the situations feel right. So thank you for that. And another really big question is when the summer's happening now, so that's great. People can be outdoors, but soon what we're going to have to be dealing with, parents are going to be dealing with, is returning to school in fall, right? And for a population, many kids might not, I know kids over 12 can get the vaccine, but many younger kids might not be able to get that vaccine yet. So what's the best practice for returning to school when vaccines aren't available for young students, but masks aren't required necessarily in some places yet?
That's a tough one. I have a 12-year-old, and he is vaccinated. Well, he's half vaccinated. He's almost finished. But he's in middle school, right? So half the student body is not going to be vaccinated by the time school starts, really. So I don't know what they're going to do. I know they're going to kind of do a hybrid model, but not every, school system or parent is going to have that option. I worry about it, honestly, if people are going to have to be forced to send their kids back and there's not good protection. And I would hope that schools would be sensible and require a mask, but then you have Florida, so I don't know.
I mean, when I read that question, I'm actually surprised because, again, unvaccinated people, kids should be wearing masks. So I'm surprised if there are schools. I guess it happens. I'm in Los Angeles, and we're back at half-day school, and everyone, masks are required. Despite what the CDC said, when the parents come to pick them up, doesn't matter what your status is, everyone's masking around school campus. Which I appreciate very much so. And so it's hard. Yeah, I would be shocked if this, but a lot of shocking things have happened this past year.
Yeah, look, I think best practices might be what we were doing already, especially as kids were unvaccinated. So we know masking worked, right? Kept the rates low. Elements of social distancing did work. We're hoping for the vaccine in September or sometime after that for lots of, grade school and above kids. But I think this is going to be, I think it's going to be a little bit political. I think it's going to be very state dependent. You can see that we have lots of stuff in the chat, right? Everybody's in different states. And we know that's been the challenge. So in places where masking is okay, right? And, Dr. Vicki, you said Los Angeles, right? They came out, a year before any kid's vaccine had, even it was a glimmer in the eye, and said, everybody needs to be vaccinated. And there was a lot of blowback over that. But we know in lots of states, there's no mask mandate. There is definite pressure to not do that. So people are going to get fined if they wear masks to school, right? That's a huge disincentive. So I think it's very local. It's very political. So I think it's going to be far more complicated. The ideal thing would be for kids to at least do masking until we get a good vaccination rate. But I think that's going to be very, very local and very complicated and very political.
Absolutely. And I will say this as a science advocacy organization. I do think, and I know parents are usually great at this, but there's no better time to engage with your school community, other parents, and have that discussion like we were saying before that maybe the CDC should have had with a broader community. I think it's important that we talk about this and what is safe and how we can make sure that these situations are safe, because this is all very local. It depends on the state, it depends on the area, the specific school, and there are a lot of different factors: masking, ventilation, vaccination rates, case rates, in the community. So it's going to be a tricky one. But what I would say is, it's good that we have these conversations and we must all engage, because we need to work together to really beat this thing and keep everyone safe. So do keep having those discussions. So another common question that we get is about people who are immunocompromised. Is it safe for vaccinated immune-compromised people to go out to stores wearing a mask if others are not? Thank you, Laura, for that question.
Wait, what is it? I don't understand. Is it safe for them? Maybe that's to go to the stores wearing a mask. Maybe they meant the opposite.
No. So I guess the question here is that there's been studies which show that people who are immunocompromised, if you're a cancer patient or a transplant patient, right, and you got the vaccine, that might not confer as much immunity as someone who's not immunocompromised. So therefore, I think a lot of people talk in my discussions, they're worried, right? Does this mean the pandemic has ended for people who are, not immunocompromised and are vaccinated? But what do people who are immunocompromised do? Do they have to keep, because there's no mask mandate in many places, is it safe for them to go out in public and indoor spaces when other people are not masked? So maybe the precaution that they could take is wearing a mask. Is that enough to sort of live life? I guess that's the question.
I mean, that's...
jump in. Oh, sorry. Go.
No. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to jump in and say, right, take care of, it's a vulnerable population. Take care of a lot of folks who have immunocompromised status. So I think the good news is I think vaccination does give you some protection, right? Mm-hmm. It reduces your personal risk by a lot. Now, maybe that's a little bit less than an immunocompromised individual than a fully immunocompetent individual, but it does give you a lot. Now, hanging out with other vaccinated people, I think you should feel pretty free. Probably take the mask off. Going into a busy store where everyone has to go, let's say a grocery store, I think that risk is still somewhat higher. Now, I think there's circumstances that we have to think about. If you're a cancer patient who, is not actively having treatment, you could take more chances and take more risk. But if you were, let's say, having chemotherapy currently, 100%, you should be doing masking, you should be doing social distancing, all those precautions. Don't forget, you can also get other things besides COVID. Just because you're vaccinated against COVID, if you're immunocompromised, you can get still plenty of other things from other people. So I would still, take precautions to reduce your personal risk as much as possible if you're an immunocompromised individual.
I actually have a backup question. So I actually literally had a conversation about this with a friend whose cousin had a kidney transplant, and they had their antibodies checked. Like, is that something like an immunocompromised person could do, like to see like if they did mount a response or not, or is that something?
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, I guess it just kind of depends what maybe the condition is, or what the source of, or what it is that is making them immune compromised, whether it's medicine or a condition. But yeah, I think unfortunately they're going to have to be really careful for a long time, especially since, the virus can persist longer there. And so there's opportunity for mutation and within immunocompromised individuals. And also, I think that just underscores the herd immunity piece, right? We're supposed to be getting immunized and keeping careful to protect them, right? Yeah. So that we can effectively eradicate it, so that herd protection covers them. So that's a caring about humankind and your fellow man problem. So, yeah.
Yeah, I will say this that's another area where research is still coming out, and it's the immune system is as a biologist, it's the hardest part of biology, I always feel, because it's very individual. It's a complex system, right, which is different in each person. So I think you can do the antibodies check. Just because you have low levels is not the whole story, and it might depend on certain things. There are memory cells, and it's a whole complex branch of science, right? So it's something that you can do, but is not only definitive. But you talk to your doctor. That's the trusted conversation that you have. They'll know you best, and that's really the important thing. But you're right. I think right now for immunocompromised people, taking what precautions you can, is a good thing generally. Again, it's the layers of protection. So the vaccine will help a bit. Keeping masks in certain situations will keep helping, and avoiding other certain situations where you're uncomfortable, or if you're in a situation that you can't, is a good thing too. So on to the next question. So it's a conversation one, right? So we're having these conversations right now, and I think a lot of our audience really does get this, but we do have these difficult, because of the CDC guidelines, we have these difficult conversations that we now have to have with certain family members, right? Of, how do I convince my family that we should still wear masks indoors, sometimes since our young kids aren't vaccinated? So how do we approach something like that where, one person in our family says, but the science says, the CDC says we don't have to do this, where because of the reasons that we were talking before, maybe we need to take extra precautions in certain situations. How do we approach a tough conversation like that?
I've had trouble. My brother won't get vaccinated, and I can't convince him no matter how many times I promise him I've worked with the same kinds of vaccines and stuff before. But but I take a hard line on my kids, you know what I mean? And I think for a lot of people who maybe, have tricky situations with their family, this is the one time to take advantage. You can use a global airborne pandemic as a scapegoat to finally erect those boundaries that you've been longing for. Put your foot down. They're your kids. It's your job to protect them. Seriously.
Well, Dr. Neecey, I'm sure there's plenty of people we need to, cut out, but I think, this conversation just as easy as lots of conversations across Thanksgiving dinner tables, right, with families, some of which can be fraught, right? But I think it's a conversation. I think you should start early. For example, we're all super excited to see people. I know people, they've not seen family members for 18 months or longer. So it is, in some sense, it's high time, right? Like we're a lot of those social bonds that we need to rebuild. But I think you have open conversations and talk about how comfortable you are. It doesn't have to be the same as somebody else, but you'd probably want them to respect you. And I think this is easier for states where everybody buys in, everybody's vaccinated, but in places where it's really split, there aren't mask mandates. I think these are far harder, right? Because you can't always say no to keep every family member out, right? So I think it'll be an ongoing conversation, and hopefully people can meet in the middle. But I'd start early.
Yeah, I agree. I think conversations, compromise. I definitely had these conversations early on in the pandemic, and compromises. Everyone has to be outdoors. It's hard. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but just like Dr. You take a hard line with the kids. You can blame your doctor. Our pediatrician recommended this. Or blame. The CDC says kids should be masked. If you want to play that game, you could do that as well.
Or just it's totally a compromise. Like a lot of the time, I would just be like, "I'll meet you at the park." It's just you can keep asking me if we can do this or a barbecue or a dinner or whatever, and I'll keep my response will always be, "I can meet you at the park." So you can just be consistent.
Absolutely. And I think the one thing that I would add to that is that coming from the science communication, and I know a lot of you all are, amazing science advocates, but really sometimes just beating people over the head with facts or saying you're anti-science it's not going to work, right? It has to be it's going to be a frustrating conversation sometimes, but you have to be patient and empathetic. And it's really about values. And it's good to reflect other people's feelings too, because I think people do, have a reaction to being cooped up for a year. That's natural, and you can hear that, right? But then, you can you should acknowledge that and sort of bring it back to, we need to protect the safety of everyone, which maybe includes kids, includes extended family, and sort of bring it back to that, bring it back to shared values. So, it's always a difficult conversation, but I think you're right. The first thing is to make sure we don't label people, we don't shirt those things. We sit down and have these tough conversations and do it over time, and come to shared values and shared agreements. And good luck to everyone who's having those conversations. I think they're really important right now. Eva Smith, this is an interesting one. As also in fall or maybe over the summer, people are going back to work, right? So in terms of the CDC guidelines, and asking your workplace to require vaccination, can workplaces do that? And how should we feel as individuals going back to a place to work? What would I be asking my employer in terms of safety?
Gosh, I don't know.
It's a tricky one. Definitely is.
Well, Look, here's what else, because I tried to take a deeper look at it a little bit, and everything's all over the map. And I think CDC guidance is not there yet in terms of this. I even looked at what they said around workplaces. It's a lot about getting people vaccinated, which is great, right? We want that. That's terrific. But I think it's going to be an open question. One, can your employer ask you about vaccination, right? Or what sort of vaccine passports that have not come into being yet, or that will they be accepted or not? From an HR standpoint, what can an employer force you to do or not? I think they're still supposed to let you have the disability and religious exemption, right, if you don't want to get vaccinated. So I think it's very complicated. I think we're going to see it employer by employer and state by state, right? Because a lot of, this is one thing that's been a little bit, I think, frustrating with CDC guidelines is they have said, well, local and state governments will set their own stuff, right? Without a consensus or guidance, right? And that's not great. We saw that all last year, right? Where CDC and federal government sort of abdicated everything to the states. But that's tough, right? That's tough if we have no clear standard. So I think it's going to be a lot of ad hoc sort of things, and maybe some lawsuits will probably sort stuff out, and that's not the way we want to solve things. But it's an absolute open question. And I don't know that you're going to be able to take this CDC guideline to force your workplace to require vaccination.
Yeah, no. The CDC, I think it says as far as masking, I mean, it says I actually went and read, it's masking, blah, 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 unless required by your workplace or private business. The line is there, so they kind of left it up to people to decide for themselves,
Which is absurd. There's to me, if the goal of their existence is to prevent the spread of disease, then that should be their priority in everything that they advise, and it shouldn't be influenced by other things. But I do think it's a little worrisome in terms of people's resistance, not only to vaccination, but to feeling this sense of almost the government doesn't have a right to have any control over this. And there's already precedent for stuff like this. There's almost all the careers, right, in the medical field, you have to have certain vaccinations. You have to be vaccinated for hepatitis and all kinds of things. There are employers that require vaccinations. It's not unprecedented. It's not unconstitutional. So, the government just needs to grow up here and, take some action to prevent the spread of disease. That's, I thought, what our priority was. So.
Yeah, I agree. And I think one of my biggest frustrations with the guidelines, and as Krishnan said, what the CDC has been doing the past year has been saying, these are guidelines, states, you deal with interpreting them. And I think I understand that the CDC does not set policy, but I know they understand the implications of guidelines on what policy does. As we see, in states have dropped mask mandates. One state, Texas, has even banned, sort of mask mandates from many places. I'm not sure how legal that is, but that's happened. And so that's been the frustrating bit. And the other thing that I will say with this is that, it's going to be a difficult time. Again, as a science advocacy organization, we would encourage labor organizing and workers' rights is really important if you can organize, because I think everyone deserves a safe workplace. So, keep staying informed on the science and use that to organize, for your rights, because everyone deserves to be safe when they work. So a couple more questions on the decision-making process by the CDC. So I think one of the thoughts with making this decision or guidance was addressing, sort of incentivizing people to get the vaccine by dropping the mask mandate. Do you think that's worked? Are more people getting vaccinated because they want to be allowed to go to places without a mask on?
Well, there was a bump, right? So actually, if we're looking at it, it actually kind of worked. It's only short term, right? So since they announced it, May 13th, there's been a run on lots of people signing up for vaccination. Great. I don't know if that's cause and effect, but they did do that. So that's great if people do that. Now, I feel like we could have done it earlier and said, hey, if we get to XYZ level of vaccination, whatever it is, 50%, we're going to relax our mask mandate. Hey, America, let's work toward that goal. That I think would be better, right? Rather than saying,
Right.
hey, we're going to drop stuff and, we're going to rely on you. And it's great. I want to congratulate all the people who jumped on board, right? And it's true. I mean, when I talk to patients and for my own self, I feel like it's a freedom shot, right? I don't need to use that lightly, but it does let you be free. It lets your fellow countrymen and the world be freer in the midst of a global pandemic. So there's a lot to be said there. I just think we could have prepared to hit vaccination targets and to tell people we're headed for behavioral change rather than just dropping it on them, which, a lot of people are going to abandon this, all the things that we did over the past year and a half very quickly. And in some cases, you can't blame them, right? They're tired. They're tired and they're ready to get off from that. But
Right. And that's exactly what Christine said here. Why didn't the CDC consider high vaccination rates as a prerequisite for changing, mask guidelines? And I think generally public health medicine community agrees that should have been the case. So I'm not sure, maybe at local levels that can still be enacted. And we would generally encourage it a lot because I think whilst I think that has been a controversial area, right? Like, what's the incentive if you drop something before people actually achieve it? I think that
Right.
is the flawed logic there. And I think that there's definitely been polling from places in the New York Times which said, the people who were actually going unmasked into these areas were unvaccinated anyway, right? So they were already behaving this way anyway. So what's going to incentivize them to get the shot? So we'll need to sort of unwrap that with good social science research afterwards. But I think, there's nothing wrong with a bit of solidarity and working together and, sort of incentivizing these things together. So I think that's a really good comment. So here's the question that has been tough for me, who works in public health communications, right? Usually our line would always be trust the CDC. And I want to be clear, we still trust the CDC on science, right? But, I think it's good to have multiple sources too, right? Because there's more than those specific guidelines. So I guess who beside the CDC should we be listening to at this time?
Good question. I mean, obviously your state health departments, because it's more specific to your area. Your physician, your intuition, common sense, things like that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree. I think we've been, you want to talk to your doctor, right? Because everyone's situation is different. Your health is different. You have kids, you don't have kids, lifestyle, there's a lot of different factors. The CDC, we say that, the CDC gives recommendations, like it's not law. I mean, obviously, we've been talking about this, right? So these are just recommendations and you have to take them, given your condition or given your situation.
It's a tough question, and right, it should be simple, but we've never had more information in the history of the world, and it's been never been harder to sift through all of it. So, I think this is the problem or dance with public health, right? Very easy to lose trust, right? It can take years to build up, very easy to lose it. And I think the CDC lost a lot last year, right? When we remember going in March and April, looking on the website for any kind of guidance, and they're like, only test people who came from, Wuhan province in China, but nobody else, even though the COVID is here, right? And then it snowballed from there, and they abdicated a lot of that. And so then it's really hard, right, for people to get that trust back. So I think that's where, on the back end here, I know it's a new administration and new folks at the CDC in terms of leadership, but that hangover is still there. So a couple things. One plug I'll make, and again, I'm biased because I'm with the organization, but Doctors for America has spent about a year working on COVID and has an excellent COVID toolkit, resources, highly evidence-based. You can easily just Google Doctors for America and COVID, and it'll pop up. And we've got some leading epidemiologists and physicians who give you the real answer on a lot of the questions you have. So I think that's personally, I think that's a great site to go to. I like familydoctor.org, which is the family physician public-facing website. I also like healthychildren.org, which is the American Academy of Pediatrics public-facing website as well. They're just very understandable. Sometimes challenged with CDC, even when you read the stuff, you don't know what they've said. That's been that way for like a long time, pre-pandemic and all that. But so those sites are sometimes more digestible, and I think that's trust. But I think this is our new challenge going forward: is how do we regain trust? I mean, science has never done more for us. It's created a vaccine at rapid speed, has saved all of our lives, and yet many people don't trust it. So I think we've got to find a new conversation. I know, Lucky, you've been working on that, on building this new consensus on trusting science again and believing in it, and going forward from there.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. That was really well put. And I will say that I guess people are talking about it as an infodemic. There's the pandemic, right? And then there's the infodemic of all this information and who do we trust and who do we believe. There's not an overnight solution, but I do strongly believe that with the current day and age, we have so many resources at our fingertips. We can use that for good or bad. But the solution I know is not top down, just believe this and that's it. We see that doesn't work. And I think I'm really impressed by all the work that you all do, because you do this sort of grassroots organizing, advocacy, talking to your communities. I think that's all really important. And that's part of the big puzzle that we all need to solve. So the more that we can get involved with our communities and grassroots conversations, the better we can make it for everyone. So things like this. So please keep, getting involved with all of our orgs. So one last fun question that I'm not sure you all have an answer to, but let me know. I have a couple of things. Is what is the coolest mask you have seen? Thank you, John, for that fun question. Anyone, any takers for this?
I mean, I've seen the ones, I don't know if you've seen them, but I see ads for them all the time, the clear ones. But
Yeah, those are
imagine
cool.
it's comfortable, or if they don't, I haven't tried it yet, but like, I don't know if they fog, but that would be a really cool thing to.
They're really helpful for people who are hearing impaired, so they can.
Yeah, or like,
Yeah.
I have yet to.
I do feel like that's the future, right? Because there is an accessibility problem with masks that we haven't quite solved yet, right?
My oldest son has a great mask.
Oh, what is it?
He got a mask with, it's basically like monster teeth instead of his teeth. So, I think he can wear it around to scare people even post-pandemic. So it serves a lot of purposes. So I think he's got the.
And it was great around Halloween, actually. For kids, there wasn't a lot of convincing needed to be done over Halloween for once, I think, which is really good. I do have a few. I saw this woman in England had this mask that went viral. It goes over your nose, because that was a problem at the start of the pandemic, right? So why not put that message right there? A couple of celebs, Macaulay Culkin did this great one of him in Home Alone, if you remember that, which is quite funny. And the Terminator, Arnold Schwarzenegger, had one saying, "We'll be back." After the pandemic. My favorite one was, from an activist point of view, was Naomi Osaka, who, when she won the US Open, wore the mask of the victims of police brutality. And I thought that was a very touching moment. So those are some of my favorites. And, thank you for asking that fun question. And thank you all for joining us today and sharing with us your expertise and having these really important conversations. As I say, this is how we keep our communities safe, is by having these conversations and keeping it going. So before we let you all go, maybe if you could each please tell us about the amazing orgs and the amazing work that you are doing and how people can plug in and support your work. So maybe Dr. Neecey, you could start.
Sure. So Hood Medicine is a nonprofit collective of scientists, hackers, physicians, and other assorted geeks who are dedicated to protecting Black and Brown lives throughout the pandemic and addressing public health disparities. And we are at www.hoodmedicine.org and at hood_medicine on social media.
Awesome. Dr. Vicki, how can people get in touch with This Is Our Shot, and what do you do?
Yeah, so we are a grassroots group of doctors, nurses, teachers, basically trying to elevate each other's voices to build vaccine trust, right? To get us to a COVID-free world. And it kind of goes to that last question, like, who else can you trust? And we really do believe that talking to your doctors, your teachers, the community around you is helpful, right? To get your questions answered. And a lot of it happens on social media. And so we are on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, right? Because that's where people are, and that's where people are asking questions. It's where a lot of the misinformation happens. And so we have to kind of combat that, with accurate information. And so you can find us on all those platforms. We also have a website, thisisourshot.info. Especially if you are someone who wants to join and have your voice elevated to help battle this misinformation, we would love to have you.
Awesome stuff. And Dr. Krishnan, I know you plugged before, but please do plug again.
Yeah, thanks. I represent Doctors for America, and so we're an organization of 21,000 physician advocates who really believe in patients over politics, and have advocated on everything from Affordable Care Act, to health equity, and definitely all throughout the pandemic to make sure our patients get the care they need and that policy decisions are driven to benefit them. So please check out our work, including our COVID toolkit. You can reach us at drsforamerica.org, and we'd love to engage with you.
All right. Thank you so much for joining, everyone. I thought that was a really helpful conversation, and I'm really so impressed with all the amazing work that you all do. And, keep in touch, and we will see you all soon. Have a good night, everyone.
Thank you.
Good night.
All right, so I hope that cleared a few things up for all of you. And as we navigate this tricky transition, please remember that no one is safe until everyone is safe. As science advocates, we should keep doing what we can to keep our communities protected. And that means to keep speaking up for businesses and organizations to keep their mask requirements for crowded indoor public spaces, for local governments to tie lifting public health measures to data such as vaccination and case rates. And most importantly, we need to keep speaking up that federal agencies like the CDC prioritize public health over politics. Now, before we go today, we got to do this week's Fauci fave.
My favorite.
So, each week, the Fauci Fave highlights a piece of inspiring content about the pandemic. And of course, this week we had to show the Linda Lindas, an all-girl Asian American and Latinx punk rock band from Los Angeles. So here they are.
A little while before we went into lockdown, a boy in my class came up to me and said that his dad told him to stay away from Chinese people. After I told him that I was Chinese, he backed away from me. Eloise and I wrote the song based on that experience.
So this is about him and all the other racist, sexist boys in this world. 1, 2, 3, 4!
Destroy
yeah, Linda's your rock. Thank you for that awesome song and message. You inspire us all. And the message is really important because we have to remember that a key part of public health is fighting racism. That means standing up to anti-Asian hate, addressing health disparities in Black and brown communities faced in the US, and advocating for rich countries to share the vaccines with the world. We need to remember that no one is safe until everyone is safe. Good night and see you all next week. Bye.